Hi everyone, good to see familiar faces in here. I want to excuse myself for my voice. I'm not 100% fit, but still we're gonna try to make it easy, fast and precise. So first of all, I would like to introduce myself. I'm Zeno Auersperg, co-founder and CEO of aCube, an economic and strategic consulting company in Web3. At the same time, head of economic research at Fox Finance, leading the app on Fox Finance, on Algorand blockchain. So today we're going to talk about sustainable economic models in Web3, which is something I really care about, and I think there's a huge lack at the moment in the market. But before touching the topic, I would like to move first on the traditional world now, because in the end, Web3 is just an application of the traditional world, and the idea to become mainstream has to be to bring some real-world benefits and use cases into Web3 as well. So the first question when we talk about sustainability and economic models that pop up in my mind is exactly, is our economy sustainable? And I think it's not even hard to answer such a question, because we just see like all the defaults we see in different governments. We see all the crises we are having in the last period and years. And here I have three examples that some are related or less related to Web3. And we have FTX, Bernie Madoff with the Ponzi scheme, and Silicon Valley Bank. And this is just a quick overview before we enter in the real Web3 world now. And on top of this, I found some quite interesting stories that I think exactly describe the logics behind an incentive model that goes wrong. Because in the end, we're going to talk and touch incentive models. We're going to touch tokenomics, economic models in general. And I think these three short stories, examples, like really make understand the logics behind how an incentive model should be and what's wrong with incentive models often. So I have three examples of incentives gone wrong. Maybe we touch one or two of those, but one of those that really impresses me is a story in Cobras in India, where we always start with a goal, no? A mission or a problem to solve. Then the incentives comes in, and the incentives should have the aim of solving this problem and achieving the goal. What we see is that we have the problem, we have the incentive or the solution, and then we see the consequence. If the consequence is positive, then the incentive model was correctly done. If the consequence is bad, the incentive model was wrong. So, first example, we have the problem that the British colonial government in India wanted to reduce the number of dangerous cobras. Problem. The mission, of course, is to reduce these cobras. What was the incentive? The incentive, they offered a reward for every dead cobra. Pretty easy, no? Straightforward. But if you don't analyze, if you don't deep dive the possible outcomes, the possible consequences of an incentive that you set, we see the unintended consequence. People started breeding cobras to kill them and collect the rewards. So what happened? Always even more cobras. The government saw this problem. They stopped the reward, and all the breeders just left free all the cobras. So the consequence was even worse than the initial problem. And I think this is the main logics. Like, my goal here is to make you understand the real logics behind an incentive model. And this can be adapted, and we can see this type of problems in Web3 as well. Another fast example of incentives gone wrong, to always understand this problem, incentive and consequence. The problem, severed hands in the Congo, no? The problem was that, or the goal, was that during the Belgian colonial period in the Congo, the government wanted to increase rubber production, rubber quality. So the incentive, which was quite unusual incentive, was soldiers were rewarded for the severed hands of workers as proof of their efficiency. What happened next is the unintended consequence. which is that soldiers began cutting off hands, in general, random, not only to those who were really producing rubber, just to get the reward. So what happened? Terror and humanitarian crisis. So this is the logics that I want to follow during today now. So we have the problem, the goal, we have the incentive, and then we have the consequence. Moving on to Web3 and touching the real topic of today. Web3 is not immune. And I think everyone here knows it already now. But the thing is, today I would like to touch 3 different points of economic models in Web3. The first model, the first problem, and the first micro topic is about the economic model behind, so the mechanisms of an infrastructure, the mechanism of a protocol, of a new feature, and so on. The second one is in terms of incentives, and the third one is literally Ponzinomics, Ponzi schemes, and so on. So first one, Web3 is not immune, and we have a first example, Iron Finance and Terra Luna. I guess Terra Luna is the most known here, but what happened behind is the same thing. And the problem here is, just to give a quick introduction, it was about algorithmic stablecoins. So stablecoins that are pegged, not even pegged, but they have a mechanism behind that keeps their peg with burning or minting another asset, which is a volatile asset, which is the dual tokenomics side. In this case, we have Luna and UST, or with Iron Finance, the same thing. What happens is that the model behind, so the mechanism of burning or minting another volatile asset to keep pegged another asset is quite easy to fall down. And this is because if the other asset is not a real world asset, or doesn't have real value, but is based on trust or demand of different users, which in this case was Luna, what happens if the trust falls? What happens if there is no more demand? What happens is from one day to another, it just explodes. And we're talking about 20 billion market cap projects. We're not talking about 1 million market cap projects. And this problem is the design behind. So one unsustainable economic model in Web3 is literally the design behind, not even incentives and so on. Of course, the process was made faster because of the incentives between Anchor protocol and so on that were accelerating this bankrupt. But the problem in the end was the design behind. To move on, we have value DeFi. Here it's a different problem that we are facing. It's not anymore the design behind the economic model or the mechanisms that are giving the rules of a protocol or a product. It's more about the risk assessment of the project itself. This is something similar to what we have seen on Silicon Valley Bank or Signature Bank, where there is a mismanagement of the assets or of the risk assessment of different assets you have. What happened here, it's quite straightforward. Lending and borrowing protocol, TVL around $100 million at its peak. What they did is they offered as collateral their own token. What happened here is that their own token, the main value of its own token, was purely driven, like the demand was purely driven with the demand of the project itself. So during bull market, where there is demand for the lending and borrowing protocol, there was demand for the token as well. When there is the demand for the token, you see there's a sustainable and stable price, or even growing price. So what did they say is we can list it as collateral with even a high loan to value. So you could even borrow a lot in percentage against the collateral you're depositing. But what happened then is once there was less demand for this project, it moved directly to the price of the token. There was less demand for the token as well. And the problem is that a lot of tokens were deposited as collateral on the protocol, and a lot of borrowers were borrowing against this collateral, which at once just began dropping down in price. And the problem is, if there is no demand and if there is no real value behind, liquidation might not be successful, and so also value DeFi crashed in literally a few days. Moving on, we have something related to Bernie Madoff. So in the beginning, I had those 3 pictures, and on those 3 pictures, I wanted to link one example in Web3 space, which is all about Ponzinomics, so Ponzi schemes, which I guess most of you should know already. It's those type of models on a pyramidal scheme where the money that comes inflows from down just goes to reward those who are on top of those, and at once it starts not to be sustainable anymore because there's not a real yield, a real value that is created, but it's just money that is coming, inflowing from new users and so on. What happens here is it's quite the same thing. It was a trend in 2021. All these new DAOs were jumping and coming in the game. We know Olympus DAO or Arom DAO and so on. What was happening is they had the same model of a Ponzi scheme. The additional value, the innovation in Web3 was that they were covering it behind a token. So the Ponzi scheme was that it works like this. People buy this token, OHM in this case. People buy the token, the price increases. If the price increases, it attracts new demand. With the token, you could deposit it with like crazy APYs, around 8,000%, which like a normal person should see that APY and say, it's not working. But then you see the price increasing, you say the API paying out, and that's sustainable only if we continue having new inflows now. At once, what happens is that people want to dump these APYs. The price starts to decrease because it's not sustainable that 8,000% is entering in the scheme. And at once, the price decreases, less bonds are bought, less treasury assets are backing the mechanism, and so on, it starts crashing. And this is quite similar to a standard Ponzi scheme, just covered with tokens. Moving on, what we saw is, to recap a bit the causes behind these collapses, we saw that for sure, in some cases we have malpractices. In some cases we have mismanagement, both in traditional than in Web3 space. In other cases we have hysteria. That's also a problem. Because sometimes, especially in the traditional finance, but we see it here as well, with stable coins mainly, if there is hysteria, if there is FUD and a lot of fear, what happens is this chain of less trust in such a protocol, which might be sustainable, but then if it's something, a mass sell of a token or a stablecoin and so on, you might see at the peg now. You might not see it stable as before. And this is something quite that we see often. The hype as well, that's also something we see that is not sustainable. It's not helping to become more sustainable and more mass bigger, let's say. And another point that I would like to highlight is exactly the short-termism, which I think is something that is so frequent in Web3, but in general, like I think our brains as humans work that we really appreciate or we value even more the gains we have in short term now. Everyone doesn't see the big picture, the long term like plan. No, every time everyone is more focused on what we have today, tomorrow, next month, next year, but we don't care about the long plan, the long picture. And this is also a problem, because if everyone focuses on the short term, we see in Web3 so many focus on launch the product, launch the token, a bit of hype, a bit of marketing, dump the token, and no project is trying to be long term, and that's the problem that is not leading DeFi and Web3 to become mainstream. Because if we want something sustainable in the long term, we have to think in the long term as well, and not think about high yields this month and then collapsing for forever, you know? And so moving on, what's the solution to all these economic models that are not helping the growth of this field of Web3, of DeFi in general, and so on? The solution is to work with a data-driven approach, with some real mathematical approach, and trying to simulate different outputs, try to focus on the economical side of projects, not only on the hype, the marketing, and the tech side. And it's something that I see is missing quite a lot in the founders and in the Web3 startups, which are more focused on the marketing, the hype, and so on, and not on the model behind. And that's exactly what we do at A-Cube. We focus on the Web3 ecosystem modeling, so from new features design, to risk assessments, to creating new features, to designing tokenomics, but in a way that is focused on the long-term approach, on the sustainable approach, and in trying to give real use cases to the project, and not only based on the short-termism, easy gains, and not sustainable models. As a success story to bring here, I thought about Fox Finance, which we have been working in the last 3 years since the launch. And if you deep dive it a bit, you can see how the first approach we had also in the incentive model compared to all other lendings, which is we pay depositors. But we saw if the incentive model is not right, you're not bringing value. If you are paying depositors on a lending and borrowing protocol, what's the value? They're not using your protocol. So the first approach was, let's pay borrowers when they pay back interest. And that's the first approach. And you're changing completely the approach, and this is incentivizing real usage. It's not incentivizing just metrics and short-term growth and et cetera, et cetera. And for instance, Fox Finance, I did not introduce them because we are at Decipher Algorand, so I thought maybe all of you know it, but it's the leading the app on Algorand. It's a hub for asset management, so lending, staking, borrowing, margin trading, and swaps. And what we have been focusing on and still focusing is the sustainability and the long term behind the features and behind every economical addition. Yeah, I think before I turn it off, but I think it's...
You prefer off?
No. I think we... Yeah. When I was alone, it was okay off, but now I think... So what do we do? Or not what we do, but what is the solution? What do projects need? Projects need to create value. So on the project side, on the models behind, to create value. And what is creating value? Incentivizing borrowers who are paying back and are utilizing the pools and the project, or incentivizing depositors which can just deposit, eat the rewards and incentives, but are not even using the protocol. What is bringing value, you know? This is the difference. Good fundamentals, so having real features that work well and so on, and the long-term approach. And that's in what we focus and what we really believe. Moving on, I don't want to be boring, so we're not going to read all this slide, but just to understand quite a quick overview about tokenomics. Tokenomics is those set of rules that manage, direct, and lead a token, no? So I think just a few points to understand why it's crucial to have a study behind that and not just copy and paste other models and so on, is first of all, we have different micro categories under the tokenomics. from the supply side, so the allocation side, and how we distribute this allocation. And that's also influencing the selling pressure, the inflation rate, and it gives a lot of inputs, a lot of variables that might affect the token price performance. So this is one side. The other side is more on the utility side. So on one side, we have the selling pressure, the distribution, and so on. On the other side, we have the demand side. We have to drive demand with what? Use cases, utilities, and so on. On this side, the approach has to be to bring added value on top of the protocol. Protocols then don't need a token. Probably the token won't have real value behind, and those are exactly those tokens who can crash like this. So the idea is try to bring utilities, added value, and real use cases behind the token. To talk about examples that I like, we have Aave, which probably you might know, is the leading lending and borrowing protocol. What they're doing is quite a standard tokenomics without all those weird new crazy models that often are just crashing the token or adding layers of risk and so on. We see it has the governance side and the staking side. But on the staking side, it's not just the deposit and you earn rewards. The staking adds a layer of safety to the protocol in case of economic losses. So there is a real use case behind those staking side. It's not just you deposit and you earn some rewards without having the real use case or the flow behind that. And on top of that, it's good on the governance side to give the opportunity to users and the holders the possibility to govern the protocol itself. So to wrap it up, I really care to pass this message of moving the focus from the short-termism to the long-term approach by trying to give utility, good distribution mechanisms, give some value to accrue through time, and incentivize participants in the ecosystem. So the recommendation is try to be, a good anecdote is exactly the one of the turtle that in the end, by moving slow, always achieves its goal, while maybe faster animals that run at the beginning, they might collapse at some point. So that's exactly my recommendation, now to be all more tortoise and focus on the long-term growth. Thank you. Here you have to scan both my personal and the company's QR to connect, to stay in touch, and etc. And I'm more than happy to answer whatever question anyone might have. And sorry again for my voice and so, but I'm quite sick. Is there any question? Okay, then,
I have a question.
yes.
Besides the protocol, could you give a couple of examples of famous, biggest protocols, lending protocols in the space with a sustainable economic model besides Aave and besides Fox Finance?
So, with sustainable economic model, or we're talking only about the token? What is your question? You want on the token side or on the model? On the token side?
Yeah.
Let's say that lending and borrowing protocols to build a sustainable tokenomics, it's not the easiest task, exactly because you have to find the right type of incentive approach, which doesn't have to hurt the application itself, no, and has to incentivize a good usage of the protocol. But the thing is that users and investors are much more hyped or attracted from earning faster money or having some huge rewards on just simple deposits. And this is what often in the long term is collapsing those token prices. And the problem is you have to wait, in a sense, the benefits, because in some sense, Web3 DeFi especially is very focused on the speculative side now. And to attract users, you still have to compete with your competitors now. So you have to incentivize, in some sense, similar to them, or even more, no? But by incentivizing even more, it means you're distributing or you are issuing new tokens and you're adding new allocation to the circulating supply, which means you're adding new selling pressure because you're giving out tokens now. And this might affect negatively the market and the token price performance. So on the lending and borrowing side, it's difficult, if you're talking only about the lending and borrowing side, it's difficult to give real value behind a token because mainly it's just a rewarding token. The success you see it once you manage to have other type of use cases and utilities behind that token, because if it's only about rewarding, people is not going to hold it without a use case or without a utility behind, no? So they're going to farm them, accrue them, and then dump them on the market. So the idea is, I don't have examples focused only on the lending and borrowing. One might be Compound, but what they have is a strong reputation that helps as well. What they have is the added time that they have been in the market. That's also another variable that supports the token side. But on top of that, it's always a difficult balance to understand how much to incentivize, how much not, because on one side you are having a benefit out of that. On the other side, you are having a negative feedback out of that, because one benefit, you're attracting people. On the other side, you're adding selling pressure on the market, which might dump your token. So it's quite difficult to understand what's the right approach and how much is correct to incentivize and so on.
So you can only judge based on those who are already established in the market?
Yeah, on the token side for sure, because what we have seen maybe also with if you check Radiant, the token, at the beginning it was super hyped because it had crazy incentives, no? So of course people were super attracted and interested. They had a huge growth because if you can deposit, you can borrow money, not even for free. You borrow money and you get paid to borrow money. Okay, so that's not sustainable, of course, in the long term, no? But at the same point, that's what attracts users in this field. So it's difficult to compete with such protocols. But if you see it in the long term, what we have seen, okay, the first hype, they launch a token, it goes great. A lot of users, a lot of growth. In the long term, the token is collapsing completely. They're launching a new token, and they're trying to cover this approach and mechanism they had in a new way, you know? So that's what I can add on this. Any other question?
In cases like, we'll take F-Algo for example,
Yeah.
which was, for those of you who don't know, was a previous iteration of a token issued by Folks Finance to represent a deposit in your wallet. And when Folks released their 2.0 platform, they did away with these placeholder tokens, and they were replaced by intertransaction and smart contracts. So I guess my question is, seems like a lot of different dApps that could benefit from coming up with a good tokenomics system. But at the same time, are there any that stand out to you that just generally don't need a token and can stand alone on smart contracts on Algorand or another blockchain?
This is This is a good question, and I think this is more on the subjective side. Like my point of view is, I feel a lot of projects don't need a token, and it's of course the easiest way to monetize, you know, because you add a bit of hype, you marketize it good, and it's the quickest and easiest way to monetize and create value, no?
But if you have a sustainable economic model to begin
Absolutely, absolutely. But the point is, a lot of projects don't have it. A lot of projects just launch it with the idea of getting rich in the short term. And I mean, this is the perspective from the investor side, venture capitals, and it happens as well that this is the point of view of the founders as well. The token is just the exit liquidity we will have now. But of course, a lot of projects don't need a token, or try to give some random use cases, which in reality, if you deep dive them, it's not a real use case, or they're trying to cover some new use cases and utilities, when in the end, often it's just trying to put on paper some new flows that seem as a use case, but in the end are not adding value or bringing value. I think that if a project works without a token, it's not necessary to have it. It's often seen on the governance side. And in that case, what can you say? On the governance side, you can always have a token. But is it really necessary to have a token on the governance side in a lot of projects that are, in the end, mostly centralized? I don't think so. But it's a difficult question. Like, it's very subjective.
Okay, thank you.
Or another point, on the governance side, token will be literally the shares, no? Just on the governance side. That will be just the shares tokenized.
Yeah.
So it's not adding anything on top of that, any use case or utility more, no? If you use it only on the governance side, it's just, because also with the shares you have voting power, you vote in the different congresses, and then it moves ahead, no? So, yeah. Anything else?
I think we're at time.
Yeah, so
Those were good questions. Thank you so much.
thank you.